Hello everyone, and also welcome from my side, and many thanks for inviting me to this very exciting forum today. And I'm very happy to be one of the final speakers here because I can piggyback on what has been said before by Peter and also by Stefan. And actually, I'm with the OECD as well. I'm a policy analyst in the Development Cooperation Directorate, and Peter alluded already to that we at the OECD like very much slides, and we like data and statistics, and we also like frameworks. So I have a set of slides with me. I hope that this is coming up soon. Where I can present you some work on the blended finance side. And maybe while the slides are coming up, I can already pick up on what Stefan just described, because I'm in the Development Cooperation Directorate, and we are working very much with donor countries, how they actually can use their aid flows, their development cooperation funds towards investing in water and sanitation in developing countries for sustainable development. So we are not focusing here today in my presentation on what can, for instance, Spain do it for itself at home, but what Spain and other donors are doing for developing countries. And there is this concept coming up of blended finance, and I will let you know much more about what this actually means. So we also already know why we are here today. So there's a massive investment gap, and we have seen some great pictures this morning which had a very strong language, much stronger than these figures here, but at the OECD, as I said, we like figures, so I brought a lot of numbers which frame basically the playing field where we operate. So basically, there's a massive investment gaps for the full SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, but in particular also for the water and sanitation one, SDG 6. In the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which has been endorsed by the UN members in 2015, there was a massive role, or a key role given to the private sectors to step in to be one of the players who can fill that role, not only in the investment side, but also in terms of its operations. But today I will focus very much on the private sector as an investor for development outcomes in the water and sanitation sector. So again, as I said, and also Stefan alluded to it, so development finance and this traditional aid system, which we are dealing with since the 60s and longer, is very much important. So this is highly concessional funds below market rates at terms and conditions. I'm sorry, I'm a banker, and it might get a bit technical here and there, but these are funds which are very much important for development in developing countries. We see here some flows for the water and sanitation sector. So for instance, in 2015 and 16, development aid was basically around 2.5 billion US dollar on average, which is very important, in particular for the developing countries. But we have also seen the massive need for investment. And there's this figure floating around of 2.5 trillion US dollars for the entire SDGs, and of course also a high figure for the water and sanitation sector. So we appreciate and acknowledge very much the strategic development finance which we have from the Development Assistance Committee members which we work with, so donor countries basically, but also from other donors which are very strategically relevant when it comes to investing for the poorest and for the outcomes, but it's not sufficient. We know that the needs for the SDGs are much bigger. So as I said, in 2015, the United Nations have really put the private sector as an investor at the center stage. And this is what we call basically blended finance, because on a standalone basis, the private sector is not really yet investing in developing countries, in water and sanitation, but also in other fields. So we need to mobilize the private sector to step in. And when I speak about the private sector, and to make that clear here, it's really the investor side. It's asset managers, it's commercial banks, it's pension funds, it's all the money floating around, not yet being directed to development outcomes in developing countries. So when we talk about blended finance, and that's really a buzzword these days in the international development fora, we speak about how to really strategically use this development aid, which I just presented, which is a scarce, valuable resource, but limited. So how can we use that strategically towards mobilizing private investments for development outcomes? So this is what we call blended finance, basically a mix via the use of financial instruments to trigger private financial investment, either by adjusting the risks of projects, so making it more attractive for the private sector, or by adjusting on the return side, so increasing the return for the private sector. And we'll get more into detail on how that can actually look in practice. Before I do that, I show you some figures about the state of blended finance in the water and sanitation sector. We have done a survey because we are, as I said, are very much interested in using data as an evidence base to inform policy making and to inform how developed countries can make the more of their aid in terms of water and sanitation. So what we see when we had a look at the financial flows from 2012 to 2015 over 4 years, we see that overall 80 billion more or less were mobilized from the private sector by official development finance in developing countries, which is a reasonably big amount. But when you see in which sectors the private finance has been mobilized, so where the private sector is actually currently investing in, then you see that the three largest sectors are banking, financial services, energy, industry, mining and construction. So we actually see, and there might be spillover to water and sanitation, but we see currently the private sector is investing only in sectors where the business case to the private sector is quite clear. So where commercial banks and asset managers would invest also in developed countries, because that's very dear to their heart and they know how to do the math about these kind of projects. Water supply and sanitation, however, is only accounting in our survey for 2% of the private finance mobilized. So only 2% of the private sector finance is going and directed to the water supply and sanitation sector. So we actually see that there's some room for improvement, and we try to understand better, and I will speak later about it in a study, how we can actually mobilize much more private finance in the water and sanitation sector. But before we do that, I will break down this term blended finance a bit. So blended finance could be a guarantee given by an official development actor, be it a development bank, be it a development finance institution, that kind of expresses a guarantee that the private investor would get its money back as if the client really fails to pay it back. So a guarantee is a very important and the most used blended finance instrument at this stage. And we see that here at this graph, which is a bit complex, but I try to make it clear for us here. It's that guarantees account for 60% of the private finance mobilized in the water and sanitation sector. So actually, official development finance in the form of guarantees has the biggest impact on mobilizing private finance in the water and sanitation sector so far. Other blended finance instruments we are looking into are, for instance, syndicated loan. So an official investor like a multilateral development bank leading in a loan as an arranger, and a private investor stepping in as a B-loan provider. This is also a form of financial instrument which triggers and mobilizes private finance for water and sanitation, and we think that's promising and can be scaled up in the future. And to be even more concrete, and I'm sorry here, there's and you will figure out that this is not accounting to 100%, so the equity is 10%, but there was a translation between a banker and a graphic designer. But I will just explain you a model of blended finance, how it's actually currently working in India. With the help of the German Development Bank, which is the KfW, actually there was set up a vehicle which lends to municipalities at the state level in India that then can invest in water and sanitation projects at the local level. So an ideal outcome, because these municipalities, they don't have access to reasonably cheap or affordable finance. So this construct here of blended finance is really leading to the fact that municipalities are able to access loans for water and sanitation projects in their municipalities. So how is this actually working? This is very interesting. So the KfW is basically providing some risk cushioning together with the government of Tamil Nadu, which is a municipality in India, in order to have a vehicle that issues bonds to the institutional local investors at commercial rates. And this money is then on-lent to local municipalities for a water and sanitation project. So by having development actors providing some really risk guarantee or risk cushioning for the private sector, the bonds that were issued are very attractive to institutional local investors, and they hold these bonds and they're happy to invest in water and sanitation projects, which they haven't been before. So here you see how blended finance could really work in practice. Finally, and this is also something what we do at the OECD, we provide frameworks on what's good practice and what we would like to see when it comes to blended finance, not only in the water and sanitation sector, but really much broader. So last year, the ministers of 30 development assisting committee members, including Spain, have endorsed these blended finance principles. for unlocking commercial investments for sustainable development, including in the water and sanitation sector. And these are really 5 principles which should frame every action in the blended finance sector in order to make sure that the parties, the private finance and the public finance, meet together at a level playing field and invest for sustainable development. And you can see here, this goes from really explicit effective partnering for blended finance, so we don't want to over-subsidize the private sector to invest because we have scarce public funds. Also, there's a development rationale behind blending, so you shouldn't pull out public finance in order to let the private finance comes in. So there's a lot of principles which frame good practice in blended finance. And I will stop here and just say that, of course, private finance, as we all know and heard today, it's not a natural thing, neither in developed country, to operate in the water and sanitation sector. So we can't really solve the puzzle only with the private sector in the water and sanitation sector, but we see that, or we think, and we will investigate in a study that these 2% of private finance mobilized in the water sector can be increased and more efficiently driven towards the water and sanitation sector in the future. To that extent, again, I'm working on development finance in the Development Cooperation Directorate. We are having a project undergoing with our colleagues, our water experts actually, who are leading on the roundtable of financing water in order to better understand how we can really unlock commercial finance for water and sanitation in the future. And we will publish that study next April, and are currently having a lot of consultation rounds. So if you have any case studies or any information we should be aware of, I would be very happy to talk to you and to get this information. I stop here. Thank you so much.